archaeologists believe Jesus Christ grew up in this first century house in Nazareth, according to research.
Here, just next to the basilica, we have found not only some cisterns, but also the remains of the walls of a house above ground, above the bedrock. And this hasn't been found up till now, so it really is some kind of a revelation from the point of view of Nazareth. The character of the walls is typical of Jewish villages in the early Roman period, and so this would be the sort of house that Jesus or people of his period would have lived in.
Archaeologists in Nazareth, the hometown of Jesus Christ in modern-day Israel, have identified a house dating to the 1st century that was regarded as a place where Jesus was brought up by Mary and Joseph. The house is partly made of mortar and stone walls and was cut into a rocky hillside. It was first uncovered in 1880s by nuns at the Sisters of Nazareth convent. But it wasn't until 2006 that archaeologists led by Dr. Ken Dark, a professor at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom, dated the house to the 1st century and identified it as the place where people who lived centuries after Jesus' time believe Jesus was brought up. Whether Jesus actually lived in the house in real life is unknown, but Dr. Ken Dark believes it is possible. Was this the house where Jesus grew up? It is impossible to say on archaeological grounds, Dark wrote in an article published in the Biblical Archaeology Review magazine. On the other hand, there is no good archaeological reason why such an identification should be discounted. Jesus is believed to have grown up in Nazareth. Archaeologists found that centuries after Jesus' time, the Byzantine Empire, which controlled Nazareth up until the 7th century, decorated the house with mosaic and constructed a church known as the Church of the Nutrition over the house in order to protect it. Crusaders who ventured into the Holy Land in the 12th century fixed up the church after it fell into disrepair. This evidence suggests that both the Byzantine and Crusaders believed that this was the home where Jesus was brought up, according to Ken Dark. The story of the Jesus house. Until recently, few archaeological remains that date to the 1st century were known from Nazareth, and those mostly consisted of tombs. However, in the last few years, archaeologists have identified 2 1st century houses in this town. The other house was discovered in 2009 and is not thought to be where Jesus grew up. The nuns' excavation of Jesus' possible home in 1880s were followed up in 1936 when Jesuit priest Henry Senes, who was an architect before becoming a priest, visited the site, according to Dark. Senes recorded in great detail the structure the nuns had exposed. His work was mostly unpublished, and so it was largely unknown to anyone but the nuns and the people who visited the convent. In 2006, the nuns granted Nazareth Archaeological Project full access to the site, including Senes' drawings and notes, which they had carefully stored. Dark and the project's other archaeologists surveyed the site, and by combining their findings, a new analysis of Senes' findings, notes from the nuns' earlier excavation, and other information, they reconstructed. The artifacts found in the 1st century house include broken cooking pots, a spindle whorl used in spinning thread, and limestone vessels suggesting a possible family lived there, the archaeologists said. The limestone vessels suggest a Jewish family lived in the house, because Jewish beliefs held that limestone could not become impure. If a Jewish family lived here, it would support the idea that this could have been Jesus' house. Dark and his colleagues found that the house was abandoned at some point during the 1st century. After that, the area was used for quarrying, and then later in the 1st century it was reused as a burial ground. 2 tombs, now empty, were constructed beside the abandoned house, with the forecourt of one of the tombs cutting through the house, the researcher said. Centuries after Jesus' time, the Church of the Nutrition was built around this house and the 2 adjacent tombs, but the church fell into disuse in the 8th century. It was rebuilt in the 12th century. In addition to archaeological evidence, a text written in AD 670 by Abbot Adonam of the Scottish Island Monastery at Iona, said to be a base on the pilgrimage to Nazareth made by the Frankish bishop Archaeological, mentions a church where once there was a house in which the Lord was nourished in his infancy, according to a translation of Adonam's writings by James Ross McPherson. Dark and his team have published journal articles on their work in the Palestine Exploration Quarterly and the Antiquaries Journal.